Yesterday we held a Google Hangout based on the interest from this thread on creating a gem from scratch. Unfortunately, when I set up the Hangout, I did it incorrectly and it didn't record it to YouTube, so I'm going to record a video and replay the steps that we did last night. The Hangout itself was great. There were 32 people there, some interesting questions. It took about 40 minutes to build the gem from scratch. This is the actual gem that we built. It's called modularize. So this is something I needed in my own project. It's a very small focused gem. It doesn't do a lot, but it is something that I wanted to build. So what it does is you can give it a string in this form and it will generate a hierarchy of modules similar to this. So animals, cats, and Bombay. Of course, you could just type this out in Ruby, but in my own project, Spec, I have lots and lots of classes that live inside namespace like this: commands, groups, invitation, and the class create exists within it. Without actually creating these modules, running this Ruby will error because it'll say commands doesn't exist or groups doesn't exist. And I want to avoid having to write this kind of style here. So in the initialization step of these gems, it actually creates this hierarchy of by using modularize, and then all my classes can look like this. So let's recreate this. I'm going to start from scratch. So we're going to use the bundle gem to actually create a new gem. So the command is bundle gem modu. I can never spell this. Let me just copy it here. Modularize. Okay. So bundle gem modularize, and this will create in a new folder this gem, or the skeleton for it. It creates a Git repository, all of those things. So what do we have in here? I'll open it up. So starting from the bottom, we have a README, we have an empty rake file, which brings in some tasks that allow us to build and publish the gem. There's a gem spec, and this has kind of metadata about our gem. The name, the version, which is declared here, the lib folder. It has things like the license, the homepage, description, email, things like that. So we leave that as is for now. There's also a license, defaults to MIT, which is fine for this gem. And that's it. So it kind of sets up an empty skeleton for us. So we're going to use RSpec to actually test drive the implementation of this. So I'm now going to set up RSpec. So RSpec -- init will create an empty or a spec folder with a spec helper in it. Let me just clean up some of these comments. We want to require the actual gem that we're working on, which is modularize. So we should be able to call RSpec, sorry, not RSpec. Well, you can call RSpec and it'll run the tests. I like running the task from rake. So currently we have no rake tasks for this. So I'm just going to copy something from what we did, what we built yesterday, which is this here. So this is from if you search for a rake gem task, it will bring you this, or rake task. So it's setting up the default task to run the spec task, which runs the RSpec runner. So saving that, now we should be able to go rake, and it will, well, it should run. Of course, it's not, because I haven't required RSpec. This project knows nothing about RSpec. So we have a dependency in the RSpec gem itself. So in the gem spec, we can declare these dependencies. There are two types. There are runtime and development dependencies. For our case, we only want this in development, so it's a development dependency. So if I bundle install and then call rake, this is now actually running our test. So we're now set up to do TDD. So the first thing I'm going to do is create an empty spec, and I'm going to call it modularize underscore spec. Okay, and in it we're going to first of all require a spec helper, and then I'm going to describe the thing that we're building, which is going to be a module itself called modularize. That's a block. Okay, so if I run the reg task now, we should get an error in that. Oh, we're not getting an error because I don't think it's actually running it yet. Why do we not get an error there? Oh, the reason is that this module already exists. So by default, there is a module called the name of the root name of the actual gem that we're creating. So that's I expected that test to actually fail, but it didn't because this module already exists. So let's actually test something. So the first thing we want to test is that if we give it just a single module name, that it actually creates it. So it creates a single module. So this is kind of the simplest test that we can do. What do we want to do? We want to call modularize.create is the API that we're going to use, and we're going to give it something like fruit. And what we expect that to do then is to create a module called fruit. So if I just run that on our own, we're not testing anything at the moment, but it's given us an error saying, you know, this create method doesn't exist. So let's create that. So I am going to create this, and it's going to be called modularize again. I'll never be able to spell that without thinking. So it's a module called modularize, and it's going to have a method in it called create. Undefined method create, yes, because we're not including this here. So in this root, this is kind of the entry point into our gem. This is the thing that when you from your project where you're using a gem and you go require gem name, this is the file that it loads up. So within that we can require any internal dependencies that we have on other Ruby files. So we are going to require modularize is the folder, and then within that we have a modularize.rb. So this hopefully will pass. No, it doesn't. Okay, so wrong number arguments. We're passing in fruit here, and the method itself doesn't actually take something. So we'll call this, let's call it name, and this should now pass. So we're just calling the method. The method is doing nothing. We're not really testing anything other than that the signature of the create method exists. So let's do something there. So we actually want to test two things. First of all, before we call create, we want to test that the module named fruit doesn't exist, and then after it we want to test that it does. So there's a couple of ways to do this. There is a defined method in Ruby which kind of has a weird API, so it's worth bringing it up here just so we know. Okay, so if we create a variable called a and we call defined a in it, it brings back a string describing what the thing is. If we call defined on b, which doesn't exist, we get back nil. So we're either going to get back a string of some value or nil if it doesn't exist. So what we can do is go defined fruit should equal nil. Okay, so this should pass in that before we create something, the fruit module, it should bring back nil. So we can now do after we create the module, fruit should no longer equal nil, and then it should return a string. So this will fail because our create method is not actually doing anything. So time to actually implement the create method. Now this this implementation actually comes from the reason for creating this gem is because I want to extract some behavior from an existing gem that I have. It used to be here. I've since this early on today I updated this this code to use the new modularized gem which we built in the Hangout last night. But if I go to the history of this, I can see the previous version. Let's go to this one. I should be looking at the chain set, yeah. Okay, so this was the method that we had in before, modularize. So we can, let's just cheat a little and reuse some of this. So to create a module, there is this const set method in Ruby, and this operates on another object or another module. We can also check if a module exists on an object by calling const define, and we can get that module by calling const get. So I'm going to reuse some of this stuff here just to speed this up a little. So first of all we want to check if the module already exists, and we're in the root namespace, and the way we check that is on object is in effect the root namespace for modules. So we want to say object, if the constant is defined, the module, return it. So that's going to be object const get the name that we're passing in, otherwise nil. So at this point we'll either have new module will be the module that already exists, or it'll be nil. So unless new module, so in cases where we need to create it, we're going to create a new module. And we are then going to use const set on object. And this takes a name, which is the name we're passing in, and then our new module. So I think that should be enough to get our test to pass, in that it should create the fruit namespace for us. Okay, so that passed. So let's create a more complex test. It creates. Okay, hang on a sec. Let's do that again. It creates a hierarchy of modules. So this is going to be similar. We're going to modularize.create, and this time we'll create animals, cats, Bombay as before. So before it, we're going to check that animals, cats, Bombay. So that namespace, that module hierarchy should not exist. So let's just run the test to verify that it doesn't, and that works, yes. And I will call modularize create. Okay, so this is failing because our code didn't deal with this kind of case. It was constants by name can't have that form. So this name is not really a name. It's it's a path, or maybe there's a better name for what this represents, but I think path will do for now. So we want to split on. So remember, path is something like A, B, C. Okay, so we want to split on the double colon, and then for each of these we have an individual name. Okay, so we want to do something similar in here. We're going to so for each name we're passing in, we're going to check if the constant is defined. Now, for the initial version, we did it on object because we were operating on the global scope. But in this case, okay, we'll process A first, which will go on object. B, we want to go on A, so we kind of want to keep track of the last module that we we worked on. So I am going to create a variable called root and say that's the object. And then we'll replace that here. So the root is what we're operating on. It'll be the object the first time. So at this point in this do loop, we've created a new module. So if we assign that to the root, that will mean that when we process B, the root will be A. When we process C, the root will be B. So let's see, what is this right now? So we now have root equals object. We iterate over to the names. We get the new module if it exists. If it doesn't, we create one, set it based on the name on the root, and then update the root. So this will possibly work if we typed everything right, and it does. Great. So at this point, oh, sorry, we need to verify actually that the namespace is indeed being not nil. So let's do that. Okay. So at this point, it's kind of functionally complete in terms of what I wanted to do for my own RESTpack project. I'd like to refactor this slightly in that it's not very readable. I mean, const define and const set, and it's not a particularly readable part of Ruby. So I'll extract some of this out into a private variable, sorry, private method, and we'll call this create module, and it will take the name of the module and the root that it's going to operate on, and it's basically going to do this exact thing here. So we're passing in the root, we're passing in the name. So we're going to call this from here. So we now want to create module, passing in the name and the root. The difference being that we want this create module to actually return the new module, so that we can assign it to the root out here. Like that. So let's just verify that everything's working, and it is. Great. And a final change, I'd like to make the root an actual argument to be passed in that has a default of object, so that it's slightly more useful. And this now reduces the main public API for this gem to be something very simple. You pass in a path, maybe a root, it splits it, and then for each of it creates a module. I think that reads pretty well, and this is private, so it doesn't matter so much. It's less important that this reads well. Obviously, this possibly could be improved with some better names. Well, maybe not. I mean, the complexity comes from the internal Ruby const define and const get, and this is kind of a weird API. You'd rather just be able to get something and check if it's null or whatever. I don't think const get works like this. Maybe it is, and if it is, we can refactor this later. So at this point, let's see, what would we do? We have a Git repository here, so let's add this stuff. Create module, create. Okay, so we now have well, we now have the gem, I guess. So if we run rake t to see what our rake tasks are, you'll remember from when we created this, the rake file pulls in these gem tasks from bundler, and this is what we're seeing here: rake build, rake install, rake release. So this is actually going to, if we run rake build, it's going to build the gem file for us. Well, it's going to run some diagnostics on what we have and then build a gem. So it's giving us a warning here, or an error, saying that the gem spec is not correct, and it's complaining about the description. So let's give it a description. Hydrate Ruby modules. Ruby module hierarchies dynamically. Okay, and I'm just going to do that to save some time because we've actually already did this last night. Updated gem spec. Oh, I tried to push the repository there. Of course, I haven't set it up for remote. But okay, so let's try that again now. Rake build. Great. So that has created a gem for us in package / whatever gem, and it's versioned this for us. So at this point, then we can push to RubyGems. So you do that by going rake release. Now, I've already pushed this gem yesterday to RubyGems, so I'm not going to do it now, but this would push that version up to RubyGems, and you'll see that we actually pushed version 0.0.2 yesterday. So I think that's it. We had some questions yesterday on the Hangout. They were around testing and things like that. I guess if you have any questions, you can ask them in the comments in the video, and I will answer them there. Okay, thanks very much.